Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished professional from Barbados, Makeda Alleyne. Makeda, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ash.
Thank you. Makeda is a transformational coach, a speaker, and a trainer. She is the founder and director of Makeda Alleyne Programs Limited. So, Makeda, before we talk about two subjects, the confidence catalyst and set fire to your fears, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Sure. So as you said, I'm a transformational coach, speaker, and trainer, and I'm originally from Barbados. I started my career within training and development, and I've been working within the industry for nearly 20 years. And I've had the honor and privilege, really, of working with some real world-leading companies such as PwC, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, and Allen & Overy. And that was in the capacity of designing and delivering learning solutions.
Right.
So that's kind of my background. A big part of my background, which is one that I don't necessarily talk about as often, so it's kind of like a bit about what people don't know about me, is that, yes, I've had this career within training and development, but then in 2018, my life completely changed. So in 2018, I had a breakdown, and I was signed off from work for 5 weeks with anxiety and depression. And that really, I like to talk about it because that really was a turning point in my life, because it was at that moment that I made a really big decision to stop doing just what I thought I should do and start finding what it is that brought me joy. So that took me on a really beautiful and transformative journey where I learned how to own my dreams. So I always talk about fighting for my fairy tale. I learned how that making changes to my life as I was in the process of doing is really uncomfortable, but uncomfortable doesn't have to mean unbearable. And I learned how to finally believe in myself, what I'm capable of, and what I deserve. So I took those lessons, and as you said, I started my business, Makeda Alleyne Programs Limited, and I started that in 2019, where I now deliver one-to-one and group coaching, training programs, workshops, and keynote speeches for professionals across the globe. And they're all crafted to help people unlock their greatest asset, which is themselves.
Correct.
So I always say, as a result of working with me, individuals who feel as if they're not quite living up to their full potential, what they do is they push past the point where they usually stop. They trust themselves to make brave decisions, and they position themselves for really transformative joy, pride, and abundance. So that's a bit about me, including the bit that I don't talk about as often.
Yeah, fabulous. And thank you so much for sharing this part of your journey with me and my viewers and listeners. So, Makeda, let's talk about the confidence catalyst. And I'm sure a lot of this has come because of all the changes you made to your life. But my first question is, how do you differentiate between genuine confidence and overconfidence?
I love this question, Ash. So confidence is all about self-assurance. It's your belief in yourself and your abilities. So a confident person knows who they are, they know what they're capable of, and they're very much comfortable rather in their own skin. So they don't need to boast, they don't need to overshadow other people. It's like their action and their demeanor, it just exudes assurance. Overconfidence, on the other hand, is when someone overestimates their abilities. So they genuinely believe that they're capable of more than they might actually be capable of. Think of it as someone saying, I've got this, when in reality they don't have this, and they don't really fully grasp the situation. So it's often a case of being overly optimistic. I wouldn't say as if that's someone who is overconfident, that they're bad intentioned. I think they generally mean well, but they just might not see the full picture or see what might be considered potential pitfalls.
Fascinating. Thank you. And what, in your view, are some of the common barriers to confidence, and how can individuals overcome?
Okay. I think there are a few barriers to confidence, to be fair. I can talk about three. Let's say three. Let's talk about three big ones. So the first one is negative self-talk. So that's the voice in your head that spews all of those negative and self-defeating thoughts. So I'm talking about the I'm not good enough. I can't do this. Other people are better than me. Those types of thoughts. Research shows that the thoughts that we have about ourselves are our biggest determinant of our confidence. So if we're talking about how to overcome it, what you need to learn how to do is to dissociate from that voice in your head. Because as I tell my clients all the time, just because you think something doesn't mean it's true. So you need to be able to dissociate from that voice telling you all those negative things. And you also need to learn how to challenge and also change that negative self-talk so that the voice in your head turns into one that empowers you and really encourages you to take bold action towards the type of life that you want to live. So that's the first one, negative self-talk. The second barrier that I can speak to is what I call the comparison game. The comparison game, and I swear this is like kryptonite to confidence. It's constantly comparing yourself to other people, and it can make you feel as if you're always falling short and as if you're just not good enough. And I always say social media can make it so much worse because you're almost like comparing your insides to other people's outsides. So if you want to overcome the comparison game, instead of measuring your success against other people, a great practice that you can undertake is to set your own personal goals. So what do you want to achieve? What steps can you take to get there? So focus on your own growth and development. So stay in your lane and also track your progress. And I say as well, this is something that we don't often do. Celebrate your achievements. Celebrate your achievements. Even if they might seem small to you, get into the habit of recognizing and celebrating your own successes if you want to overcome the self-doubt and build your confidence. And then finally, I would share seeking external validation. This is something that we very often do. So this is when we rely on other people for their opinions, approval, or praises to feel good about ourselves. It's like constantly needing a thumbs up from other people in order to feel as if you're doing enough. And you're essentially saying, I can't feel good about myself unless someone else tells me that I should. And that's a real tricky game to play and a real shaky foundation because other people's opinion can be so fickle. So if you want to overcome this, what you need to start doing is start validating yourself. So when you accomplish something, take a moment to acknowledge your effort and to acknowledge your success. So tell yourself things, it might sound cheesy, but tell yourself things like, I did a good job, or I'm proud of myself. Because reinforcing internal validation, what it does, it gradually reduces the need for external praise. So those are the three barriers that I would share.
Well said. What a great
to
response.
confidence.
What a great response. Thank you. My next question, Makeda, is how do you maintain confidence in the face of criticism or negativity?
Yeah, maintaining confidence in the face of criticism and negativity, it can be tough, but I'd say it's definitely possible with the right mindset and strategies. I'd say my main bit of advice would be to stay grounded in who you are. When you're clear about who you are, when you're clear about your values, when you're clear about your goals, it's so much easier to stay confident because you know that you're on your path. And criticism and negativity, yes, it can shake you, but it won't shake you as much when you're rooted in your own beliefs. Also, focus on your strengths. So what is it that you're good at? What achievements do you have? Make a note of those to combat the negativity and combat the criticism. And then finally, I would say just learn and keep it pushing. Keep it moving. If there's a lesson in the criticism, learn it and move on. Because dwelling on the negativity is not going to help you grow. So take the constructive parts of the criticism, improve where you can, and let go of any unhelpful bits.
Well said. Can you also now talk to me a little bit about the role of failure in building confidence and how can one navigate this?
So this is interesting. Failure can actually be, this might be surprising, but failure can actually be one of your greatest allies in building confidence if, and this is a big if, you use it as a learning opportunity. So think about it. Every time something doesn't go as planned, it's like life handing you a little workbook with notes on how to do better next time. Let's say, for example, I present a lot. Let's say you totally bomb a presentation. So instead of spiraling into self-doubt, think about areas where you can improve. Maybe it's your preparation, maybe it's your delivery. And every tweak that you make, it actually boosts your confidence because you know that you are improving. And also the thing about failure is that it teaches you resilience. And resilience, quite frankly, is a superpower. So when you fall and get back up, you prove to yourself what you are capable of. And that builds your inner strength and your confidence because you now know that you're capable of overcoming any obstacle.
Well said. Makeda, my next question is in relation to social media. And I've often spoken to people who said when they get trolled, it impacts their confidence. So my question to you is, how do you suggest people deal with external influences that may affect their confidence? For example, if they get trolled on social media.
Yeah, social media is funny, isn't it? It can be so positive sometimes, but it can also be so negative.
Correct.
I always say, listen, if you're seeing stuff on your social media that makes you feel bad about yourself, get rid of it. Unfollow, block, mute, all of the above. Your social media should be inspiring. It should be uplifting. There's no reason to be bombarded every single day by content that upsets you. And also, if you're talking about social media, remember that social media really is just everyone's highlight reel. It's everyone highlights reel. No one is out there posting about their everyday struggles and the things that went horribly wrong in their life.
Correct.
So try not to make the mistake of comparing your behind the scenes with other people's highlight reel. So I say really curate your social media so you can have you can determine the types of things that come up for you so that it doesn't affect how you feel about yourself and your capabilities.
Very interesting. A few minutes back, you were speaking about how important it is to be able to tell yourself, that you're confident and you're doing a great job and so on. And therefore, my next question for you is, what role does self-talk play in confidence? And how can an individual cultivate positive self-talk?
Self-talk plays a massive role. A surprise, in your confidence. You're never going to hear another person's voice more than you hear your own.
Right.
So really be intentional, about the way you talk to yourself. You see, when your self-talk is positive, what it does, it reinforces your strengths. It reinforces your abilities, and it makes you feel more positive. But on the flip side, more positive and confident. On the flip side, negative self-talk can really make you doubt yourself and hesitate to take action. I like to describe it as having an inner critic versus an inner cheerleader, just right in your ear constantly.
Right.
So if you want to cultivate positive self-talk, what you need to do is to first recognize when the negative self-talk is at play. So pay attention to the patterns. So maybe you criticize yourself when you make a mistake, or maybe you're playing the comparison game and comparing yourself to others. Once you can recognize these patterns, then you can start to change them. And also, when you catch yourself thinking negatively, challenge those thoughts. I talk about this a lot. Challenge your thoughts. Ask yourself if these thoughts that you're having are really true. Are they grounded in any evidence? Often what you find is that these thoughts are totally exaggerated or even unfounded. And after you challenge these thoughts, then you can get into the really fun part of it, which is replacing them with positive, realistic ones. So instead of saying things like, I can't do this, you can replace that with, this is challenging, but I can figure it out. Or instead of, I can't do this, you can replace that with, I can do hard things. So it's not about pretending to be perfect. It's about reframing things in a way that are much more supportive and much more constructive.
Well said. So now let's move to the second part of our conversation, which is again from a phrase that I picked up from what you sent to me about the work you've done, which is set fire to your fears.
Yes.
Now, that's a very, very powerful set of 5 words, set fire to your fears. But my first question for you, Makeda, is how do you differentiate between rational and irrational fears? And how do you approach them differently?
So rational fears are based on actual identifiable threats, essentially. Fears become irrational when they are often exaggerated or based on imagined scenarios. So they don't have a solid basis in reality. And also with irrational fears, the reaction to the fear is also massively out of proportion to the actual fear itself. For instance, you might fear that making a mistake at work is going to ruin your entire career. Well, that's irrational because that's an irrational response to a fear. Yeah. So in terms of how to approach them, with rational fears, I always say to problem solve. And by problem solve, I mean focus on action. So focus on actionable steps that you can take in order to move past the fear. Because action is how you really move through fear, move past fear. When it comes to irrational fears, now you're going to hear me talk about this a lot because I've talked about it before. It comes down to challenging your thoughts. So when an irrational fear pops up, ask yourself, is this fear based on facts? What evidence do I have to support it?
Right.
Also, if a fear is irrational, what you can do is to expose yourself to it. So face your fear in small, manageable steps so that it becomes less irrational and it moves towards being a rational or standard fear, as it were.
And for our viewers and listeners, can you share a technique that has been effective to manage or overcome fear?
I'll share one of my favorite techniques, Ash. So a lot of fears can come out from catastrophizing. Catastrophizing. And catastrophizing is when essentially you spiral down a rabbit hole of obsessing over worst case scenarios. So you're thinking things like, what if I fail? What if I end up worse off? What if I make a fool of myself? What if I put myself out there and get rejected? What if, what if, what if, what if? So a technique that's super effective is to examine those worst case scenarios. So I can give your audience 4 questions to ask themselves. And it's a great technique. So if you find yourself catastrophizing and thinking about all these worst case scenarios, the first question to ask yourself is, what's the absolute worst that can happen?
Right.
What's the absolute worst that can happen? So really imagine the worst case scenario for a second. What's the worst possible outcome? And also naming your fear, it gives them less power. So what's the absolute worst that can happen? And then the second question is, how likely is it that it will happen? So what you want to do is put your fear into perspective. So often the worst case scenario is improbable or even unrealistic. So how likely is it that it will happen? The third question, what would you do if it actually does happen? What would you do?
Okay.
So having a plan in place, it diminishes fear. It transforms the unknown into a manageable situation. So what would you do if it actually does happen? And then finally, what's a more realistic view of what might happen? So challenge those catastrophic thoughts with a dose of reality. Most situations have a range of possible outcomes, not just these extremes. So what's a more realistic view of what might happen? So the 4 questions are, what's the absolute worst that could happen? How likely is it that it will happen? What would you do if it actually happens? And what's a more realistic view of what might happen? So hopefully that technique is useful.
Absolutely. And these are very, very powerful 4 questions all our viewers and listeners can ask. Moving on, my next question is, how does facing and overcoming fears change the way an individual can approach challenges and opportunities?
So facing and overcoming fears, it can, really, it can totally change the way that you approach challenges and opportunities. It's like almost unlocking a whole new level of confidence and resilience. So I say, think about it like this. If I use myself as an example, before I did all this work on myself, when I encountered something scary or uncertain, my default mode was usually to play it safe. So stick to what's familiar, stick to what's known, stick to what's safe. But after facing my fears head on, I've realized that I'm capable of so much more than I thought. Now, instead of shutting down, instead of procrastinating, instead of letting fear hold me back, I'm much more inclined to lean into challenges and see them as opportunities for growth rather than obstacles to avoid. Plus, if you think about it, overcoming fears have given me a whole new perspective. It used to terrify me, and I mean terrify me. But now I see it as it's just a part of the journey. So when things don't go as planned, what I don't do is beat myself up about it. I take it as a learning experience and then move forward stronger than before. So yeah, facing your fears can definitely change the way you approach challenges and opportunities. In my case, it's made me more resilient and more willing to take risks. And I'm sure it has for other people as well.
Well said. And what would your advice be for someone who is paralyzed by fear and struggling to take the first step?
Okay, well, if there's one thing you need to know, it's this. Action is the antidote to fear. Action is the antidote to fear. You can't plan your way through fear. You can't think your way through fear. You can't wish your way through fear. The only way to conquer a fear is to take bold action right in the face of it. And by that, I mean doing the very thing that scares you. So if you're struggling to take the first step, my advice is take the pressure off.
Mm.
Take the pressure of the first step off. Your first step doesn't have to be massive, and your first step doesn't have to be perfect.
Mm.
Small, imperfect, messy action is where it is at. Progress beats perfection every single day of the week. And
Mm.
those small, imperfect steps, they add up. Because what they do is they take you outside of your comfort zone and get you so much closer to your goals.
Mm.
So if you're struggling with taking the first step, take the pressure off and instead give yourself permission to take small, imperfect, and messy action.
Well said. Well said. So, Makeda, I have time for two more questions. Can you talk about the role of vulnerability in confronting fears?
Hmm. Vulnerability is tricky, isn't it? We
Yeah.
often see it as a weakness, and we talk about it so often as a weakness. But the truth is that vulnerability can also be another superpower when it comes to confronting your fears.
Mm.
I say, think about it this way: when we are vulnerable, what we're doing is we're opening ourselves up to the possibility of getting hurt
Right.
and of facing rejection. And
Mm.
that is scary. That is scary. But it's also incredibly brave because
Mm.
it takes guts to say, I'm afraid of this thing, or I'm not sure if I can do this. So by embracing vulnerability, we're essentially saying to our fears, hey, I see you there, and I'm not going to let you stop me. It's like
Mm.
shining a spotlight on the thing that scares us the most and saying, I am not afraid to face you head on.
Mm.
And when you do that, what we do is we strip away the fear, the power that the fear has over us. It's like
Mm.
taking the wind out of its sails. So then suddenly it doesn't seem so big and so scary anymore. So yeah, I'd say vulnerability is almost kind of like a secret sauce when it comes to facing our fears. It's not
Mm.
always easy and it definitely takes courage, but the payoff is so worth it.
Well said. Well said. And my last question for you, Makeda, how does one deal with the fear of rejection, particularly in social or professional contexts?
Fear of rejection is another tough one,
Mm.
whether it's in a social setting or at work. It can seriously mess with your head, if I'm being honest. So how do you deal with it? You can start with reframing rejection.
Mm.
So instead of seeing rejection as a personal failure or reflection of you, try reframing it as a natural part of life because that is what it is, a natural
Mm.
part of life. Everyone
Mm.
gets rejected at some point. It's just a part of being human. So try not to take it so personally.
Mm.
The next thing you can do is to separate rejection from self-worth.
Mhm.
So rejection does not define your worth. I'll say that
Mm.
again. Rejection does not define your worth.
Mm.
Whether it's a dating rejection
Yeah.
or a job application rejection is not a commentary on who you are or your value as a person.
Mm.
Um, the next, I can give you one more tip, and that would be to take small risks.
Mm.
Take small risks. So instead of diving headfirst into the deep end, start with what I say is the kiddie pool. So
Mm.
take small risks in social settings and in professional settings where the risk of rejection is less. Maybe
Mm.
it is um, initiating a conversation with a stranger at a party, or
Mm.
maybe it's pitching an idea at work.
Mm.
Each little victory boosts your confidence and resilience. So those
Mm.
are three ways that you can
Very, very,
look
very
at
interesting.
addressing rejection.
Very interesting. Makeda, on that note, I want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. Thank you for speaking to me at such length about so many different aspects of confidence. I think what we covered in confidence, we talked of so many different aspects, and my viewers and listeners will definitely learn many new things about how to be more confident, on how to handle their confidence. Thank you also for telling me about talking to me about how to handle fears. And I loved your 4 points on how to overcome fears, which were, just to repeat, what is the worst that can happen to you? How likely is it that it will happen? What would you do if it does happen? And what is a more realistic view of the fears? Thank you also for telling me about a very powerful statement you made, which is action is the antidote to fears. Thank you for speaking to me about both confidence and fear. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Ash.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.